This is the Unscripted Podcast.
Bob, how you doing over there? You're looking a little peaked.
Well, it's all that work at the gym.
Is that what it is?
Paying off finally.
Well, no, Bob's gone this week, and so we last week Bob had Chip, one of our other shepherds here at the Kensington Woods Church of Christ on here, and so we thought that it'd be a great thing to bring another part of our, leadership wisdom, on here. Maybe you can bring up our average a little bit by coming on here. And so Tom Watkins is with us today, and Tom is he's one of our shepherds here, and him and his family are, kind of from this area, and so Tom moved back here about what?
2014.
Yeah, 2014, and he's been a shepherd here for about 5 or 6 years, something like that, 7 years.
Kind of toward the end of 2015.
Yeah, come up towards your mic a little bit.
Okay. Maybe I'll move it.
Yeah, slide your mic towards you. If you need to extend it out, you can. Unscrew it and extend it out some.
All right. Is that better, Ben? We got it.
Yeah, pull it towards you a little bit. Yeah, there you go.
All right. How about that?
Yeah, can you hear yourself better now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah, that's why it's unscripted for.
Exactly.
But, I thought that today we could, there's just a lot of turmoil in the world today. And,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's not like it's not ever been a point where it was.
Yep. It's kind of like here we go again.
Yeah,
exactly. As the world turns, there's turmoil.
Yeah, and so do we need to start getting our foil hats and putting them on, Tom? Is that what we need to do?
It kind of depends, if it makes you feel a lot better. I've got an old, when I bought my house, I've got an old fallout storm shelter. It's 4 acres back on the back side of it. So if you ever get a little nervous, it's got plenty of room in it. Okay?
What about food source? How are you provisioned?
I'm not provisioned that well. I do have a freezer, so we're going to eat a lot fast if the power goes out.
So we need to store high energy at the beginning, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we better do a lot of cooking up front.
Yeah, right. Well, I want to talk about today there's just been historically, religiously, speaking, every generation has kind of had its end times thing, and over the last, I would say, about the last 150 years, as we got to more of a global news networks and where we could, mass communicate, whether it was from telegraph or, we started having, world commerce on a kind of a global scale. This kind of brought the rise over and over again of these ideas that the end is coming.
And as the world industrialized, in transportation, travel became so much quicker. We ended up having these wars like World Wars, World War I. People question it: is the world going to come to an end?
Right.
World War II, is it coming to an end? And then the Cold War, nuclear power, nuclear weapons. Is this the end? So yeah, there's been a lot to feed that.
And a lot of this is probably from the unknown. I've read some of the notes from the Manhattan Project when they were setting off the first, nuclear bombs at like Bikini Atoll Islands and stuff like that, just testing it. There were some scientists that were just scared plumb to death, and they thought, there's a chance that you start this, it'll start a chain reaction, and it'll burn off the Earth's atmosphere, and then we'll be dead in a matter of, we may make a couple generations, but we're gonna be rabbits. We'll be living in little dens, and then we'll be dead eventually. And so I think a lot of those things are just born of the unknowns.
Right.
The unknowns. And the challenge with that is that the unknowns, they're really not. You understand what I'm saying? They're really not unknown in the sense that, so for example, over and over again, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 2 Peter chapter 3, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, all these kind of verses point to the fact that when the Lord returns, it'll be a monumentous occasion. It's going to be finite in its time period. It points to it just being a day. It points to, not some kind of long, drawn-out process that's going to happen. And so, part of those things are just a understanding of the scriptures, number one,
Right.
and a lack of knowing the scriptures with the rest of the world.
Right.
And so, in your lifetime, so you're what, 62? So in your lifetime, what has been some of the things that's arisen, as far as from the landscape religiously that you've seen? Like people, for example, this whole premillennialism thing, while it's not a new thing, I mean, really and truly, it had its roots almost out the chute from the church, in the first century.
Right.
But it really just kind of died off for a long time. And as we started digging up, for a lack of a better term, historical documents, that helped us, I don't want to say help, but led us, to some of these discoveries. And so in the last, even if you read our old songbooks, the old hymnals, songs that are, from the 1800s, there's a great day coming, all these things that point to there was an understanding just religiously, across the landscape that there was a day coming, and
Right.
that there wasn't, going to be this protracted process, or there are all these things, that, are you ready for that day? All these things were pointing to the fact that you need to be ready. Well, once some of this stuff kind of hits the landscape, this premillennialist, kind of doctrine, kind of bubble up religiously, you start seeing this infiltrating Christendom in a lot of ways. And so I've seen it as much as, I went back and looked at it that when the I think it was either the German or the Russian tanks, there's these beasts in the Revelation letter with the belly of beast. And, I mean, the beast of with the belly of iron. And they said it was the Panzer tank. So that would have been the Germans. And then it was the last one I read was, what is the Russian equivalent for the Black Hawk? Do you know what it is?
I don't remember the name of it.
But whatever it was, that was the Russian equivalent of the, our Black Hawk was the one that they're saying this is the one in the Book of Revelation. And especially the part of the country where I come from in Virginia, the guy Tim LaHaye that wrote all those Left Behind series books. He's got that there's a school, Liberty University there, that's a real big pusher of that kind of theology and doctrine. And so it permeates the landscape where I come from. As a matter of fact, the Barna Group has qualified Lynchburg and Roanoke as the second most religious city in America. And that's probably due to that influence of those things there. So what are some things that you've seen in your lifetime?
What you've kind of see over and over again is when you have these times of international crisis, especially, you usually have somebody that follows close with that saying, hey, the end is going to be now.
Right.
In other words, here's this date when it's all going to come to an end. I've looked at some Old Testament prophecies or the Book of Revelation, and they put out their prediction that this is when the Lord's returning and the world's going to end then, right? And that gets a lot. People are vulnerable to that during these times of crisis like that, where they're already worried about things, And so people, they sell a lot of books.
Yeah, amen.
And then that day passes, and guess what? That wasn't the day.
Right.
So they have to go back and readjust their formula, their calculation, and come up with another day. So you've just seen that. Really, it's happened multiple times. Kind of the quote modern day prophets, have this revelation that Jesus is returning on this day, or they put together from the scriptures this day that the Lord's going to return, and so the public in general, or the religious community in general, gives them a lot of attention.
Well, and it sells newspapers,
Newspapers, books, okay, for sure. Sells a lot.
And so you think about those things, like how, if I'm the one that is going to be dependent on the fact that, so, Charles Russell, Jehovah's Witnesses, I think that he said in I don't remember the date, right around the 1900s, that there was going to be he had the date pegged.
Yep.
Come and go, right? Let's go back and recalculate.
Recalculate.
Date comes and goes, right? So they do this. They kick the can down the road 2 or 3 times, and then eventually, do you remember what he says? He says, "Well, it came, and it happened, but we just didn't notice it, right?" And so, we're forced then to put our view of what we think the scriptures teach in order to make it fit our kind of thought process, the way that I approach the scriptures then.
Right. You have to kind of force everything into this real twisted, view and structure to make what you want it to say come out.
Yeah.
This might be the rapture has happened or is going to happen, but only the people that are taken will know it.
Right.
Nobody else will know it.
Right. Exactly.
So you have to come up with things like that to try to maintain, your what you're wanting the scriptures to say. And to kind of cover your trail if you're making predictions
that's right. Really, it's like read the horoscope.
Right.
And if you ever read your little horoscope thing, you can just about make it fit any situation you need to.
Right.
Because they're really good at that,
And the irony of it all, with all these people and efforts to pick out the end day, the return of the Lord. If you really look at almost any of the things that are said by Jesus or, the apostles, the books in the New Testament, if there's one thing you can be sure of when they talk about this day that the Lord returns, without a doubt, without question, you're not going to know when it's going to happen. You're not going to know when. It's going to seem like just a regular old day. Everything's going to be going along just like normal, and then it's going to happen. And so the overall thing is, because you can't know when, you better be ready at any time.
So let's talk about let's use that as our angle then. So then why is Russia invading Ukraine right now for? Is it because God is trying to fulfill some kind of prophecy? Is that why?
No. It's because just like all wars, there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of greedy people, there's a lot of just selfish human nature that gets involved with these things. The things and cares of the world lead people to most of these wars.
So we just got back from Honduras, right? Let's use that as an analogy. Can we use that for a minute?
Sure.
So we got back from Honduras. I don't remember what day it was now. One day last week, we got back from Honduras, and while we're there, we went to see their equivalent of the health department. Yep. The highest ranking, in the land. Saw the number 2 guy, right?
Right.
So we talked to the number 2 guy. We go out to, the number 2 guy says, well, why don't you if you will go to Gracias a Dios, we'll ferret you up there with the Air Force. And, that was a big, no, we're not going to do that. And it's because that's where the president was using to run drugs with. Now, they're currently in the process of extraditing him to the U.S. And he used the lockdown, basically as a way that he could run drugs and
overtly.
Overtly, yeah. Right. There's just not as men love darkness rather than light.
Right.
And so, he could do this, go through this process, work this, edge that he had. He's using, this COVID pandemic situation to really bolster the revenue. Now, what was we get over there to Choluteca, right? We're going to go to the local health department.
Right.
And what's going on over there when we get there?
Revolutionaries have locked it down.
Yeah. And what do the revolutionaries look like?
We thought they were just kind of like people, just a couple of old men just sitting around.
Yeah, they're just 2 fat guys sitting in a chair fiddling on their phones.
Yeah, hoping you'd hand them a bottle of water or something.
Yeah, I mean, and we're like, where's your revolution at? Basically that just means we didn't show up for work.
Yeah.
We're going to hang up signs. We're going to leave these 2 old fat guys over here, and we just ain't going to show up for work. And then, I think that was the first day we were there, right? Wasn't that the first day we
That
went
was
up?
the first and only day, really.
Yeah, and then we left, and when we were coming back, what did we run into when we were coming back?
A bunch of traffic.
I mean,
Far as we could see.
I mean, just both ways as far as you could see, and
We're thinking, what could have happened?
what is going on here?
Did the bridge wash out?
Yeah. Why? I mean, like there were people. Remember that we see these guys that have got hammocks,
Literally, truckers gotten out of their truck, stretched hammocks underneath the
Trailers.
trailer beds, and are sleeping.
asleep, and you're like, how long have you been here? Where you have to think, okay, I'm going to have to get some sleep, right? And what was all that over?
The revolutionaries.
The revolutionaries. They're out there burning tires in the road, because they're wanting to get, all the people that were there completely. They want to drain the swamp, right?
The old administration still had people in these government positions. They wanted them to all get thrown out.
That's right. And so, what you're seeing here in any situation, right? So you got, let's go to the Ukraine, and Russia. Russia is gets to become the bad boy, right?
Right.
They get to be the poster child for,
and rightly so.
Yeah. I'm not saying that they're, that there's no merit in that,
Yeah.
but they're the poster child now, and these are always like I had a lot of my very religious friends back home when Trump was in office saying that Trump was going to be the new Cyrus. That Trump was going to be the new Cyrus because he did afford us a lot of liberties that had been previously kind of, pushed down, kind of squashed. And so, they looked at Trump and they said, well, he's the new Cyrus. And, because Cyrus, he repatriated the Jews. You remember that? He's the one that, kind of pays for them to go back almost, as it were, to Jerusalem and funds the wall building and everything. Well, Putin is the anti then. He's stamping out the democracy, and democracy is this bastion of Christendom to a lot of people. And so because of that, now we've got this guy that becomes this figurehead for the second coming. And really what we're talking about is men doing the same thing over and over again. The reason why the people are so mad in Honduras that they're wanting to build the tires is because of bad decisions of people in leadership. Yeah. You go to any country in the world where people are starving and they don't have any kind of infrastructure. You go to, in the 80s with the little Ethiopians and stuff like that, where they would, have the poor little kids with the flies buzzing around on them.
Bangladesh.
Yeah, exactly. Help them out, send them food. And the reason why they're there is not because there aren't resources available to them. Right. It's because they have been completely stricken from them.
Yes, civil unrest has caused such destruction and decimation and just overturned their normal lifestyle and their ability to raise crops and produce food.
That they can't.
They can't.
They starve. Yeah. And so, let's look at a few things in
I was going to add this too, Chris. It's interesting when Jesus spoke about the destruction of Jerusalem.
Well, that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, he said there's going to be nations rise against nations. There's going to be all these rumors and things. He says, that's not going to be it.
That's right.
Don't let all, because it is human nature when things start, like I say, these crisis people are gullible. You're gullible then to kind of take your eyes off what's really important to God, And so, when something happens, is not what God wants us to be focused on. He wants us being ready for whenever it happens, like you shouldn't spend a whole lot of time wondering how long you're going to live, Chris, from a spiritual perspective. Now, I hope you live a long time.
Why is that?
What God wants you to do is be focused on, are you making the most out of your time today? And so it's kind of like that with this, the return of the Lord. It's not really critical for you and I. It's not critical. It's not even important for us to know the day. What's important is you're ready every day.
And I tell you what, let's take a break, and because we've run our 20-minute course here. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back, and let's look at some of these things in Matthew 24. Sure. Just some of these details to help us kind of disseminate, some of those warnings and help us kind of pick through the briars a little bit and see some of these things then. Is that okay?
That sounds great.
All right.
Life in general is about decisions. Every decision that you make has consequences. and you're tethered to every single one of them. Jesus gives us this awesome opportunity that you don't have to make all the decisions in your life all on your own. You see, he invites you to come to him, to learn from him. Jesus gives us this perfect example, and he tells us in Matthew chapter 11, he says, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm meek and gentle in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light." We have so much to learn from Christ, and he gives us this example of saying, if you really want to learn from me, take my yoke. You see, yokes were used back in Bible times to put two animals together to pull a load or to pull a cart or to plow ground. And you would put an ox together, or you would put two mules together, and they would pull the load together. And that's what Christ offers for us, is he's offering to pull the load for us. Christ invites us to come to him, and we're to be his followers, disciples, learners, people who have yoked in with him. And he builds a community around us called the church. The church is to be made up of people who God have looked at their hearts. You see, the world wants to paint a picture of everything that would divide us. The church has painted a picture of the things that unite us. That Christ, he builds this community that when we've yoked in with other people, they may be different from us, but we can learn from each other. What a beautiful thing that it is when we can have difficult conversations. There's no conversation that the church can't have. And that's what Christ wants from us, is he wants community that's strong, that's yoked in together, that learns from each other. And most importantly, that learns from Jesus. And he invites us to come, take, learn, and find.
So, do you want to look at this from Matthew 24? Do you want to look at Luke's scenario in this? Which one do you think is?
They're all, either one of them. I think they're pretty thorough.
Yeah, they are.
They do have some differences between them, not conflicts, just differences.
Yeah, just perspective.
In detail. Yeah. But if you're Matthew 24 is fine with me.
Yeah, let's look at Matthew 24, and let's pick up reading there. And because what we want to do with this conversation, Tom, is solidify in people's minds a few things. And that is that, number one, God's not going to send a flare up. You know, he's not going to, wave a flag that says, this thing's fixing to happen, right?
You will not know the hour or the day. You're just not going to know.
We want that to be clear. And number two, we want people.
And anybody that tries to tell you that and saying that God has told them these things, you and I know what. You better test that out.
That's right.
That is very suspicious.
Yeah, and so we want people to understand that the kingdom is here, right? Yeah. And that when Jesus comes back, he's going to gather the kingdom. That's what he's going to do.
Right.
So let's pick up in you really have to pick up in verse 1 to kind of get the background. It says, now when Jesus went out and departed from the temple, so he's at the temple, he's on the Temple Mount. He's been
teaching.
Yeah, he's been teaching. He's at
which was his practice to teach
that's
the
right.
temple. Yep.
That's exactly right. He's at the holiest place in all of Judaism, and his disciples come up to him to show him the buildings of the temple. Like they can impress him, right? Like, look, I want you to.
Well, they're just admiring him, right?
That's
it's
right.
Like, what an impressive thing,
Yeah, and you think about what Jesus stepped out of to come here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now, as he sat on the Mount of Olives, disciples came to him privately, saying, this troubled them, right?
Oh, yeah.
This rattled their cage.
And this was very specific, right?
Yes.
This temple will be torn down, not even a stone left stacked up. It's not like a minor thing. This is like complete.
Yeah, we're not going to have a destruction of a corner over here that we got to rebuild. Exactly. Set us back a little bit.
So this being the most important structure in all of Jewish history, really,
Yes.
They want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so from a purely religious standpoint, this to them, and it was.
It's huge.
It was the holiest place on earth. You know,
Right.
you could not find. You're not going to go anywhere else and find anywhere that will have more significance tied back to their salvation, to their story of redemption. I mean, just everything that kind of defined them, you know, was right there. And so here we are, and Jesus is like, you know, you guys are showing me these temples. I mean,
It's
these-
actually the center of their culture. If you think
that's
about it.
exactly right. You know, the you know, because that's why you remember in Matthew 5 when Jesus, you know, he's going through this scenario about like your yes be yes, your no be no, and he says, you know, don't swear by Jerusalem, don't swear by the temple, you know, because it's like, you know, like there's degrees, and when you get to the temple, son, you know, I swear on my mama's grave, you know, cross my heart, and
Right.
you know, stick a needle in my eye, you know, all that stuff. You know, it was such a significant thing to them that the temple was just one of these things that was this holy and place that God met them, and nothing was more important to them than the temple.
Right. That's right.
And so,
So Jesus has told them it's going to get all torn down.
yeah,
in
we're
their
going
life.
to peace. There's not going to be nothing left.
And it's happened before.
That's right.
And it was huge.
Absolutely.
That marked a huge change in the whole Jewish nations. That to that day when Jesus is saying this, they really haven't recovered from it.
You're right, exactly. If you go back and look, in when Zechariah and Haggai, you know, come back to Haggai is this old prophet, you know, and Zechariah is the young prophet. You know, he wasn't there. You know, Haggai was old enough to see the old, you know, golden temple, you know, that Solomon built, and then when they're building it, you know, the Bible says that there was just weeping and wailing because all the old guys realized that it was never going to be like the first one.
Wasn't as beautiful as the first one.
And the new guys are like, we finally got our temple back. We've heard the stories. We've heard everything that's happening. We got our temple back. And these old guys are just standing around weeping. And so, you know, here it is in Matthew 24. This just troubles them. And it should be a troubling thing. Like if somebody said, hey, America's going to fall, that would trouble me.
If they said the White House, not one stone's going to be left on another, we'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, we need some details on this. It may take you a minute to process it, you know, because it's such a big thing. And so, now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us when these things will be." One question. "What will be the sign of your coming?" Two questions. And the third question, "And of the end of the age." So they ask him kind of three questions here, and I will give you this. It's a little bit hard to read through this and say those are three distinct questions, and it's probably because they fully didn't understand the questions that they were asking.
For sure. Or even what they meant.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like you know, like we were working on the, you know, our your tractor this morning, and we were talking about, you know, sometimes you don't know enough to even
ask the right questions.
To ask the right questions.
Right.
And so Jesus answered him and said, "Take heed that no one deceives you."
Aha.
Yeah, don't let nobody fool you, right? Now you think about the times that it uses that word, like 1 Corinthians 15:33. You know, Paul writing to the Corinthians, and he says, don't be deceived. Evil company corrupts good morals.
Right.
Now, we understand what that means. As I lay down with dogs, I wake up with fleas. I'm not going to be deceived in that. That's the same word here. Like, don't be fooled by this. Don't think this is not going to happen to you. Many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear wars and rumors of war. See that you're not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famine, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. Those things have went on since time immemorial.
Yeah.
You know, there's not that there's.
So he's saying you're vulnerable during those things. Don't be led astray.
That's exactly right. You know, when you know, Joseph, he enlarges the borders of Egypt's kingdom, you know, just manyfold because of famine.
Right.
You know, he never lifts the sword. You know, people are coming to him and they're just like, oh, am I going to starve and just keep my land? No, you can have it. I need to eat. You know, they don't make good decisions during that. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't hold on to your land and die, but I'm saying that you know, these times of extreme circumstances,
Right.
you know, people don't make the normal kind of decisions that they make. So you think about a country that's at war. Like here's an interesting thing. Just think about this for a moment with me. we use, now I don't want to get into discussion, there's a lot of politics in this, but we use the climate change. It used to be global warming, now it's climate change. We use the statistics that the Earth's temperature is rising, okay? So you think about this for a minute. The only, they got weather stations in Poland and all over the world. The only country that's had no civil real unrest in the last, they started this in the late 1800s, has been America. Every country since then, there's been that have, like you think about all of Western Asia and Eastern Europe, all that Western bloc over there, Europe. You think a guy in 1939 Poland was going out there and recording the temperature every day when they're feeding the fires at Auschwitz with his countrymen. No, you can't. You have to throw out that data. That data is it's unreliable data. And so you think about all the what I'm trying to use by that is kind of a showing that when there's trouble happening, people do not operate the normal way that they operate. In the Ukraine right now, I guarantee you, I saw 2 or 3 days before Russia invaded that they passed a law said every citizen in the Ukraine can now own guns. Well, why are they doing that for? They're doing that because they're wanting to, they realize we're on the cusp of something. We're reacting.
And you see that if someone says you'll be safe if you go over to this city or do this, they're saying that, but people are vulnerable. Many people just accept that because of, they're scared to death, and they may actually be going to a place that puts them at greater risk.
That's right.
So.
Yeah, and so you think about it from a first century perspective. For a first century Jew, where is the safest place that they could be on earth?
Inside Jerusalem.
Yeah, as close to the temple as you could huddle, right? I mean, if that's where we do our sacrifices.
Well, and historically, that's the way all these great fortified cities worked. When the nation became under attack, the people that lived out in the countryside and stuff, farming and doing those normal things, feeding the people in the city, so to speak.
That's right.
They all loaded up and retreated back into the fortified city.
Yeah, we're going to work on grain rations now.
Yeah, and that's because those were the strongholds. They were, and you remember, Jerusalem it's a city on a hill.
Yeah, and it had water. Hezekiah dug the tunnel.
Yeah,
so right. It's from a strategy, strategic stronghold. Right. It's the place to go, and historically, think about God has met them there. Right. God has been there, and so it makes sense, right? But Jesus in verse 8 says, "All these are just the beginning of sorrows. They will deliver you up for tribulation and kill you. You'll be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Many will be offended, will betray one another, hate one another. Many prophets will arise and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved." This is something that is God always,
consistent theme.
Absolutely.
Throughout the Bible.
Absolutely.
Here, the first book, Matthew's got this in it, and you go to the very last book.
That's right.
Revelation 2:10 says what?
Yep. Be faithful unto death,
and you'll receive a crown of life. Yeah.
And so you're seeing this same thing here that Jesus is letting them know that there's going to be times that are come, but it's not just then. Every generation has suffered this affliction to some degree.
Right.
And so then he goes on. He says, "Therefore, when you see," okay, now this right here is general stuff, right? This up to verse 13, right. Just be faithful. No matter what you see happening, just be faithful. Now, verse 15, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, who, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to Jerusalem." Is that what it says?
Nope. Don't go the direction you normally go.
Exactly. "Go to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babes in those days, and pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath." Now, why would Jesus Well, let's look at this. So, what is Jesus in verse 15? What's he referencing? This abomination of desolation in Daniel.
Yeah, he's referencing one of the signs that was foretold to Daniel that was going to be associated with the destruction of the holy city and of the holy place, the temple.
Yeah, and really, also symbolically just kind of stitching up Judaism, in its finality.
Right.
They had to have there's literally physically no way a person could be a Jew after AD 70, period.
You cannot keep the law.
You cannot keep the law
Nope.
after the destruction of the temple. It's
Right.
it's physically over with then. And so and when God tells Daniel that, you remember how he kind of words it to him. He tells him, like, now you take this thing, and what's he telling him to do with it?
Tells him, even though Daniel doesn't really understand it, he understands it's going to be this destruction, but it doesn't make sense to him.
Right.
And God just tells him, you seal this up, Daniel.
Right.
You go your way. You just be faithful.
Right.
And you're going to go to your rest.
Right.
And these things are going to be fulfilled.
Yeah, it's just not for you to know.
Right. Yeah.
Daniel, I'm telling you this because I need to do this in the future. So we're going to write this down now. So Daniel would be roughly 550, 575 years before, almost 600 years before Jesus is saying this, because
Right.
Daniel would have been around 586, 580 time period. And, if we're at AD 30 right now, we're about 610 years later. And Jesus points back 600 years ago when he talks about the thing that Daniel said. Daniel, or God said to Daniel, there's going to be a point when you see this abomination of desolation. This, it is surrounding the mountains. You're just going to want to scream like he does on the road to the cross when he says you're going to wish that the mountains would fall on you, because this abomination of desolation that Daniel talks about.
And that's when he says, when that happened, when you see that, it's time
Bug
to
out.
go.
Yep.
And don't waste any time.
Yep. Don't try to get your
And
britches.
what's really kind of interesting is this. Many people, we talk about these modern day people that try to work out this day that the Lord's going to return. They'll go to the book of Daniel and take some of those very time-based things that, that God reveals to Daniel, numbers of days and things like that, to kind of work into their formula for when the Lord's going to return. And it's interesting, with all that there, Jesus didn't tell the disciples, just go back to Daniel and figure out the numbers. Just don't do the math.
That's
It's going
right.
to all come out. No, he says, this is a condition-based thing. In other words, those numbers have meaning, but not from a time chronology meaning.
It's always been that way with God.
He says, this is going to be a condition-based event. When you see this, now you know.
Well,
That's the condition you need to get out of there.
That was the same reason, the 400 years, right?
Right.
Abraham, you're going to be, it'll be 400 years. Yeah, 400 years in captivity. Well, it was really about like 430. Is that?
430 when they came out, if you read, when they actually came out.
Yeah, and so, that's not a contradiction. That's just simply, God says the iniquity of the Amorites, I believe is who it was.
Right.
Whatever soup had to boil.
Yeah, the cup was not full. Their cup of iniquity was not full.
Yeah.
It wasn't. They hadn't gotten evil enough yet for.
Yeah, and that's why Jeremiah says, you're going to be shut up 70 weeks. We're going to go into captivity for 70 weeks. In Daniel 9, Daniel says, I knew when the 70 years that Daniel prophesied had been, Daniel's getting ready to go back home, essentially, in Daniel 9, because he said, I knew that the 70 weeks that Jeremiah talked about, well, that's 70 years to Daniel. So he knew that it wasn't God's numbers. Now I'm not saying that they don't all, you're going to wander for 40 years because you spied the land for 40 days. 40 years they wandered, right? 20 and over, all you're going to die. Right? There are explicit things that God deals with.
Especially in the short term.
Yeah, exactly. And so, here we are with the Lord, pointing down the road, and he's talking about this destruction. He says, now, let's see here. Where did I stop at? For
I think you stopped on
21. Yeah. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. For the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. You know, then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand.
Right.
Therefore, if I say to you, look, he is in the desert, don't go out. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe it. Don't be deceived. For as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For wherever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. It's just as Jesus is saying, things are just as sure as the way the lightning streaks across the sky. And when something dies, the buzzards gather to eat on it. You know, this is a guarantee. Don't fall for these things. So, verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon won't give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds and from the heaven to the other. Now learn the parable. This is the parable from the fig tree. When its branches already have become tender and put forth leaves, you know that summer's near. You also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. He's using this, like we got a tree in our front yard, and Jessica said, I think that tree's dead. And I said, I don't know what would have killed it. I mean, like, it was fine last year. So we go up there and look. And I don't know if it's just things are blooming. We haven't got real used to the seasons here.
Right.
And on that little tree, there's all these little tiny, teeny, tiny little buds. So guess what we know is getting ready to happen next? Right. It's getting ready to bloom. And Jesus is saying, all these things, you need to see all these things. Because in verse 34, I surely say to you, this generation will by what? No means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. So either that means one of two things then, Tom. Either we got folks trotting around out there that are a couple thousand years old, right? And are still waiting on these things to happen. Because obviously, if this is talking about something other than the destruction of Jerusalem, you know, Jesus setting up his kingdom, Jesus, you know, the destroying of the earth, whatever kind of religious, either we have 2,000-year-old people out there. Now, one would be sufficient, right? One would be sufficient, but there's nobody that's 2,000 years old, right?
Right.
Or it happened in the first century. Which one was it? Well, obviously,
we know. We know we know when Jerusalem was destroyed. We know when the temple was torn down.
That's right.
And it's in that same condition today.
And so now we're going to answer, so we know that this is part of the question that they're answering, right?
Right.
You know, they're asking, when is this whole hubbub going to happen? You know, when are we going to destroy the temple? When is all these buildings that we were looking at, when's all this stuff, when are we going to bring it down?
And if you think in their mind, it's kind of the end of the world for them.
Yeah.
It's almost like that, right?
That's why they use this.
That's that threefold question. When's this temple going to get destroyed? You know, and when's your coming? And what's the sign of the end of the age? And that, to them, in their mind, they're all kind of related things.
Yeah, because they're still looking at the Messiah as going to come and set up this kingdom that's everlasting.
It's earthly kingdom.
Yeah, because Daniel talked about it, right? In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom that shall break into pieces all these other and be everlasting. And so they're still not seeing it in the right frame of mind.
Right.
So
they see it earthly.
That's
God,
right.
Jesus knows they need to see it spiritually.
Let's talk about this idea of the end of the age, the end times. You know, Joel 2 is a prophecy that Peter, finally brings home in Acts 2. You know, this in the latter days or the last days or the end days, whatever version you're reading, to God, this is the last. And I'm going to use this term just so we have a a mathematical or an equivocal term that helps us wrap our minds around it. But the Christian age is the last age of man.
The end times.
Yeah, this is the end times, right? This is the time that we live in. This is the end. There's not another plan coming. You know, the whole of the Old Testament was getting us ready for Jesus, and the whole of the New Testament is really the same thing, getting us ready for Jesus to come back. Right. And so, you know, when we think about, you know, from a perspective of our Creator and our Father, you know, this is the age that He was priming the pump for.
Right.
You know, all the stuff that needed to happen was for this age when and we've talked about it on our podcast many times about the church and about the, you know, this umbrella of salvation open to every creature, you know, every person, as it were, on the earth. And so let's look at Matthew 24, and let's just look at 36 through 44, and we'll just kind of, you know, we just want to stitch up here to make sure that we understand some of these things. But of that day, what day? When your return will be. But of that day and hour, no one knows, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And he's even going to kind of use an analogy here. But as the days of Noah were, so also will be the coming of the Son of Man be. This is what it was like. For as in the days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. You know, God brought Noah in the ark. He shut the door.
Right.
And up until that point, you know, man had a, you know, the reason why we know that the ark was never, it only held 8 souls. You know, 1 Peter 3:21 teaches us that. You know, the Genesis 6:7, you know, scenario teaches us that. But that was never God's plan. You know, it was never God's plan to kill everybody. You know, in the sense of that, you know, he just wanted
kind of
to
wiping the slate clean and starting over.
Yeah, God, you know, 2 Peter 3:9 says, you know, God doesn't want any to perish, but all to come to repentance. Right. You know, Peter tells us that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. Why would he be saying those things for? If God wanted this to kind of be like a little, you know, Noah thing, like, y'all just go over here and do this thing by yourself. Don't, you know, build that big old boat, you know, just kind of, you know, play it off. No, that's not what he was doing. You know, the whole time he was doing it, he was telling them about what God was going to do. Now, I'm sure he sounded like a crazy.
And the other point that Jesus is making is, it's going to fit back in with when we finish reading these verses, is just like in the days of Noah. Here's this, if you take the world's perspective, here's this crazy guy working on this ship. Well, for them, life just kept rolling on. You know, he's telling them, there's a big flood coming while I'm building this ship. God's displeased with everybody.
That's crazy Noah.
He's the preacher of righteousness, right? But he's just crazy Noah to them. And then, guess what happens? They realize it's raining.
That's right.
It's raining.
Noah was a fool until.
And that's what Jesus is saying. Back in the day of Noah, man, life was good. Everything was going on just like every day, following another day, until what?
It started to rain.
Until it started to rain.
Yeah.
This great world-changing event took place. Well, on his return, it's going to be the same way.
Yeah,
nobody's going to believe it's happening.
Look at the way it kind of words it in 39. Are you reading the ESV or?
I've got the ESV. Yeah.
What's yours say in verse 39?
And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man.
So, you know, like when it started raining, they got to be thinking, like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Like, what is this? But the flood, right?
Yeah.
When they're, you know, when it's up to their eyeballs and they can't swim, you know, now they know it's over.
Yeah.
It's too late then.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how many people were pounding on the door of the ark. You know, I don't know what it sounded like, but I know this.
But you know this, they knew, wow, old crazy Noah was the only intelligent one amongst us.
That's right.
I mean, he had it right and I had it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's one of their drowning thoughts,
Yeah,
surely.
Absolutely. And so God wants us to understand that it'll be the same way. You know, it's not like there's going to be, when the flood, right? When the flood comes, the second flood, you know, God tells Noah afterwards, I'm not going to do this like this again. You know, I'm going to give you the rainbow as a sign. Next time I'm going to destroy the world with fire. So I don't care what events may happen before. There's going to be wars going when Jesus comes back. but they're not going to be what triggers it. There will be pestilence, and there will be plagues, and there will be famine when Jesus comes back. Not that those things triggered it.
Right.
But it's because those things are common events that occur throughout history. You know, we may be able to...
And because they get great attention by man.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why they're going to be going on. And he says, don't let anybody fool you during these times of crisis, because you're vulnerable, you're gullible.
That's right. And so don't pay attention to these things. Just know that in Noah's day, it was only when they were up to their nostrils did they realize, man, we're in a bind.
And so that's what Jesus is going to conclude as you finish reading through 44 is what? You're not going to know. You just got to stay ready.
The two men in the field, one will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. So what you get to see is that the Lord's trying to show you that, listen, whatever your job is,
do your job.
Do your job. Now, when I come to call you home, you know, 2 Thessalonians 1, you know, points to this, you know, flame and fire and vengeance. You know, the last trumpet shall sound. 1 Corinthians 15. You know, that's what he's talking about here. When the Lord comes home, you know, Paul says, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, we'll all be transformed. We'll meet him in the air.
Right.
And so it's not that there's just going to be some rapture that happens that we don't know about. He's saying that...
And it feeds back to verse 31 about the angels are going to come and they're going to gather up the elect.
That's right. And so the one that's grinding, he's saying, look, boys, keep your nose to the grindstone. You know, you still going to have to work. I mean, that was a problem with Thessalonica. You remember, they're kind of like, well, he's coming back. You know, I mean, he'll be here for long. Ain't no use in working. Ain't no use in, you know, spending, you know, I got these blisters on my hand. They hurt. I don't need these things anymore. He says, no. You remember, these things is going to come back like a thief in the night. And so there will be one that will be grinding and one will be taken, the other left. And it's because the one that was grinding was ready. And there will be two women grinding at the mill. One will be taken, the other one left. Why? Because, you know, one of them women are down there grinding corn thinking, this may be the day the Lord comes. I need to feed my family.
One's living by faith.
That's right.
One's living their way.
That's exactly right. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore, you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect.
The consistent theme you find about the return of the Lord is you're not going to be able to see it coming, and so get ready at the last minute. You got to stay ready every day for it.
Well, the next several, you know, we don't probably need to get into it because we'll spend a lot of time camping out, but that's what these next few parables are about.
That's exactly the parable of the 10 virgins.
Yeah.
5 were ready.
Yeah.
5 brought extra oil.
That's
they were
right.
ready.
That's exactly right.
5 had oil, but not enough.
Yeah, so ultimately, Tom, it may come down to that America goes to war. That might be a possibility. Sure. It may come down to a nuclear war with Russia. It may come down to some kind of plague, pestilence, you know, you know, worse than the love bugs, you know, come across. I mean, there could be any number of things in America that could attack us. There could be any number of things that could attack any people in the world. But what God always thematically wants him to understand is that one day, if you're ready, faith will become sight. So you just need to spend your days just being ready.
Always be ready. And that's the thing. Satan wants to get us distracted and worried about all kinds of earthly things, right? Whereas, you know, Jesus says, don't worry. If you're seeking the kingdom and seeking righteousness, in other words, if you're living the way God's called you to live, you don't have to worry about all these concerns of the world because they're going to happen, but you're ready. So if you think about it, we could have a tremendous hurricane, tornado come by and take our lives. And we could live in fear of that, Chris.
Yeah.
But God's saying, don't live that way.
That's right.
You be ready to go. Whether your life ends on this earth before Jesus returns or if Jesus comes back, you just live your life by faith in God, doing what your Lord and Master has called you to do, and you're ready. And that's why it gives us that really that tremendous insight. I mean, people might be offended to think about it, but you know how long we live. We're so time sensitive. You know how long we live is so important to most people. But if
how long am I going to be on this earth?
but if you think about it from God's perspective, that's pretty irrelevant. I mean, let me ask you this:
if you lived 120 years,
how long did John the Baptist live?
what, 30 years maybe? You know,
Around 30 years, because he was born
6 months before
just a
Jesus.
few months before Jesus. Yeah,
Right.
And he died before Jesus died.
Right.
So say around 30 years. But Jesus said, basically, in all of human history, there was no one greater than John the Baptist.
Yeah, until everybody everybody that's ever came,
Yeah,
there was nobody like John the Baptist.
exactly. And so the thing is he died in just kind of a pretty horrendous, horrible way, having his head cut off, you know, and even the circumstances were pitiful, you know.
Yep.
But you know what? He was ready. Mm-hmm. So in the end,
And what did he say about those that come after John? Remember that?
oh yeah, he said, it says the least in the kingdom will be greater than John, which is kind of a whole nother podcast to talk about that.
That's right.
But the point being is life is, you know, how long something is, when something is, how long am I going to be here? That can kind of keep us really concerned and distracted from what I need to be living for Jesus today. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand. And sometimes you see it in the book of Hebrews in chapter 3 and 4, when we're told there, with the example of the Israelites, we're told that today, if you hear his voice, meaning what? Today, if you know what God wants you to do, what you need to be doing,
Move your feet, son,
don't harden your hearts as they did.
in the day of rebellion.
Right. He says,
Because God told
today,
them.
he says, today is the day of salvation. He's not talking about the day you become a Christian. He's talking about today.
You're breathing.
Living your faith out today. That's what salvation is about. Because you see, if I'm not living by faith today and the Lord returns or I leave this earth, I'm not ready.
Amen.
Be ready. Live the way God called you to live, and then you don't have to be distracted and misled, so gullible to all these people trying to mislead you, because God says you're not going to know when. You just know you need to be ready. And that's the message he's got for us, you know. Be
Amen.
ready.
Hey, we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
This is the Unscripted Podcast.